The gleaming spires of the Galactic Defense Academy pierced the purple sky of Centauri Prime like crystalline needles reaching for the stars. Sarah Chen stood at the base of the towering entrance, her military-issued duffel bag slung over her shoulder, trying not to look impressed. After 15 years in Earth's Special Forces, she'd learned that showing awe was often mistaken for weakness, and she couldn't afford to appear weak here. The Academy's massive doors, designed to accommodate species of all sizes, hummed open. A tall, serpentine figure glided forward, its iridescent scales shifting colors in the light of 3 setting suns. Recruit Chen, the being's translator chip conveyed in crisp Standard Galactic. I am Administrator SS Locke. You are unexpected. Sarah maintained her professional stance, though her jaw clenched slightly. Thank you for the welcome, Administrator. I have my acceptance credentials here. Oh, your credentials are quite in order, SS Locke interrupted, multiple tongues flicking in what Sarah had learned was a sign of agitation. The Council's decision to admit a Deathworlder was most irregular. But orders are orders. There it was, that word. Deathworlder. Sarah had heard it whispered throughout her journey here, seen the sidelong glances from beings who couldn't quite believe that someone from a high-gravity, high-oxygen, predator-filled planet would dare to seek admission to the galaxy's most prestigious military academy. As SS Locke led her through corridors that seemed designed to disorient, shifting gravity plates, atmosphere barriers, and passages that occasionally phased through different dimensional spaces, Sarah caught glimpses of her future classmates. A group of crystalline beings floated past, their bodies refracting light into dazzling patterns. A massive arachnoid creature clicked its mandibles in what her translator registered as disdain. Several amorphous energy beings pulsed with what might have been curiosity or disgust. Emotional translation was still a developing science. Your quarters, SS Locke announced, gesturing to a door that looked comically small compared to the others. Adapted for your particular environmental needs. Class begins at first rise of the primary sun. Do try not to break anything with your planet's excessive gravity compensation. Before Sarah could respond, the administrator had glided away, leaving her alone in the sterile corridor. She pressed her palm to the door sensor, and it slid open with a soft hiss. The room was sparse but functional, a bed adjusted to Earth standard gravity, atmospheric controls, and a small desk. A window looked out over the academy grounds, where beings of all descriptions moved with purpose between the various training facilities. Sarah had just begun unpacking when her door chimed. Outside stood one of the tallest beings she'd ever encountered, the arachnoid she'd seen earlier. Its carapace gleamed with military decorations, and its 8 eyes fixed on her with unmistakable challenge. I am Vextral, it announced, mandibles clicking. Commander of the elite squadron and top of our class. I thought I should welcome our new colleague, personally. Sarah straightened to her full height, though she still only reached the creature's thorax. Appreciate the welcome. Let me be clear, Deathworlder, Vextral continued, looming closer. Your presence here is a political gesture, nothing more. The Council may believe that incorporating primitive species will improve galactic relations, but this is not a place for charity cases. Sarah met all 8 eyes steadily. Funny, I was about to say the same thing about species that rely on exoskeletons, because they never evolved proper internal support structures. The corridor temperature dropped several degrees as Vextral's biochemical rage indicators flooded the air with warning pheromones. But before the confrontation could escalate, another voice interrupted, musical, almost crystalline. Already making friends, Vextral? A being composed of what appeared to be living light stepped between them. I'm Zilpar, it said to Sarah, its form shifting through gentle colors. Don't mind our squadron commander. He's still upset that a Jovian outmaneuvered him in last week's tactical exercises. Vextral's mandibles clattered in fury, but Academy regulations prevented any physical altercation outside of sanctioned training. With a final threatening click, the arachnoid warrior stalked away. Thanks, Sarah said to Zilpar, but I could have handled it. Oh, I know, the light being's colors shifted to what might have been amusement. But I've found that sometimes the best way to handle Vextral is to remind him of his own failures. We're not all convinced that Deathworlders are the galaxy's refuse, you know. Some of us are quite interested in what you might bring to the Academy. Before Sarah could respond, the Academy-wide announcement system activated. The holographic projection of Administrator SS Locke appeared in every corridor. Attention, all recruits. Tomorrow's combat trials have been rescheduled for immediate commencement. Report to Training Arena 0 in standard battle gear. Attendance is mandatory. Performance will be evaluated. Zilpar's light dimmed slightly. Well, it seems Vextral's welcome party wasn't the only surprise today. The combat trials weren't supposed to begin for another cycle. Sarah allowed herself a small smile as she reached for her gear. Good. I've always preferred to let actions speak louder than words. As she prepared for the trials, Sarah couldn't help but think about all the doubters back on Earth who said humans would never be accepted into the galactic community. About the politicians who argued that humanity wasn't ready for full integration with advanced species. About every sneering alien dignitary who used the term Deathworlder like it was a slur rather than a testament to human resilience. Well, they were about to learn why Earth's children had survived an evolutionary gauntlet that would have broken lesser species. The combat trials wouldn't just be a test, they would be a statement. Sarah checked her gear one final time and stepped out into the corridor, where recruits of all species were hurrying toward Training Arena 0. Some moved with confidence, others with trepidation. She noticed Vextral gathering his squadron, already strategizing. Zilpar floated nearby, its light pulsing with what might have been concern. The message was clear, the Real trials were about to begin. And humanity's first representative at the Galactic Defense Academy was ready to show the galaxy exactly what a Deathworlder could do. Training Arena 0 lived up to its name, a vast, empty space of polished black material that seemed to absorb light itself. Sarah stood with the other recruits, noting how most species naturally clustered together, leaving a conspicuous gap around her. Only Zilpar hovered nearby, its luminescent form casting subtle patterns across the dark floor. Administrator SS Locke's hologram materialized in the center of the arena, scales rippling with barely contained excitement. Today's trials will test your species' natural combat adaptations. The arena will simulate various battlefield conditions. Your objective is survival, nothing more, nothing less. Sarah caught Vextral's mandibles clicking in what her translator interpreted as smug satisfaction. The arachnoid warrior had positioned his squadron strategically, all 8 of them forming a perfect defensive formation. Begin, SS Locke announced, and vanished. The arena transformed instantly. The black floor fractured into floating platforms of varying sizes, suspended over what appeared to be a bottomless void. The air itself became thick with swirling, metallic particles that interfered with standard vision enhancement technology. Atmospheric degradation and gravitational instability, Zilpar commented, its light dimming to adjust. They're not starting easy. Sarah's military training kicked in. While other recruits activated various technological aids or biological adaptations, she relied on pure human proprioception, the innate ability to know where every part of her body was in space. A gift from millions of years of evolving on a planet where one wrong step could mean death. The first attack came from above, a swarm of combat drones, disguised as the metallic particles. Several recruits, including 2 of Vextral's squadron, were immediately tagged and teleported out of the arena. Sarah dropped and rolled, her muscles responding with the rapid twitch efficiency that had made human athletes the subject of xenobiological studies. Impressive reflexes, Deathworlder, Vextral called out as he effortlessly picked off drones with precision strikes. But let's see how you handle this. He triggered something on his combat harness, and suddenly the gravity began shifting randomly between platforms. Sarah didn't waste breath responding. Instead, she demonstrated why humans had become apex predators on Earth. While other species struggled with the changing gravity, she adapted instantly, using the varying gravitational pulls to launch herself between platforms. Each jump was calculated not just with her mind but with the intuitive physics understanding written into her DNA by countless generations of tree-dwelling ancestors. Remarkable, Zilpar commented, maintaining its position by converting partly to pure energy. Your species appears to have natural parkour capabilities. Summer camp on Mars, Sarah grunted, ducking under a drone strike. This is nothing compared to the Olympus Mons obstacle course. The next phase of the trial introduced environmental hazards, patches of extreme heat, cold, and corrosive atmospheres. Several more recruits were eliminated, their environmental protection systems overwhelmed. But Sarah's body, evolved to handle Earth's wildly varying climates, adjusted automatically. Sweat glands activated in heat, blood vessels constricted in cold, and her reinforced lung capacity filtered toxins efficiently. What truly set her apart, though, was something the alien observers couldn't quite grasp: human pattern recognition. Where others saw chaos in the arena's constantly changing conditions, Sarah saw rhythms. The gravity shifts followed a complex but predictable sequence. The drone attacks had discernible patterns. Even Vextral's supposedly random tactical adjustments betrayed underlying logic. "They're hurting us," she called out to Zilpar, who had proven surprisingly adept at survival. "The arena's pushing everyone toward the center." "Yes, but why?" Zilpar's question was cut short as the central platform suddenly merged, forming a single combat zone. Phase 2, SS Loktha's voice echoed. Close combat assessment. Sarah found herself facing Vextral directly, the remaining dozen recruits forced into a tight circle. The arachnoid warrior's combat harness hummed with power, his natural weapons augmented by advanced technology. Finally, he chittered, mandibles spreading in challenge. "No more running, Deathworlder. Show us what passes for combat prowess on your primitive world." Sarah settled into a ready stance, her body relaxed but prepared. "You know what humans are really good at, Vextral? Taking hits. Your species evolved that lovely armored exoskeleton because you couldn't afford to get hurt. We evolved to keep fighting even when we did." The fight that followed would be studied in xenobiology classes for years to come. Vextral's attacks were technically perfect, each strike delivered with devastating force and precision. But Sarah moved like water, employing what seemed to the observers like an impossibly inefficient strategy. She let herself get hit. Not directly, and not without purpose. Each glancing blow taught her something about Vextral's reach, his timing, the limitations of his joint movements. Humans called it learning distance, the ability to gauge an opponent through controlled failure. It was a strategy that only worked if you could survive the learning process. Stand still and fight properly. Vextral raged as another perfect strike failed to connect fully. Why? Sarah ducked under a sweeping leg, noting how the movement exposed a gap in his guard. Because that's how combat should work? Hate to break it to you, but humans wrote the book on fighting dirty. The turning point came when Sarah finally went on the offensive. She had catalogued every weakness, every millisecond of overextension in Vextral's perfect form. And then she demonstrated why humans were classified as pursuit predators. She didn't try to match his strength or speed. Instead, she pressed him constantly, never allowing him to reset his stance or recover his rhythm. Each movement flowed into the next, an endless combination of strikes and movements that seemed to defy tactical analysis. "This isn't proper combat protocol," Vextral protested, his attacks becoming increasingly desperate. "No," Sarah agreed, finally seeing the opening she'd been creating. "This is survival." The finishing sequence happened so fast that even the arena's sensors barely tracked it. Sarah used Vextral's own momentum against him, redirecting rather than opposing his strength. The arachnoid warrior found himself off balance for the first time in his combat career, and by then it was too late. The arena fell silent as Vextral's combat harness signaled his elimination. Sarah stood at the center of the platform, breathing steadily, body marked with impacts that would have incapacitated most species but barely registered on her Earth-evolved pain threshold. Administrator SS Loktha's hologram reappeared, all three tongues flicking rapidly. Trial concluded. Results, unexpected. Combat protocols will require adjustment. As the arena powered down and the eliminated recruits rematerialized, Sarah noticed something had changed. The gap around her remained, but now it was tinged with something new, respect. Even Vextral, after a long moment of mandible clicking, gave her what appeared to be a gesture of acknowledgement. Zilpar floated over, its light pulsing with excitement. I believe you've made quite an impression. Though I must ask, did you plan all of that from the beginning? Sarah allowed herself a small smile. Rule 1 of human combat doctrine, adapt or die. We've had a lot of practice at adapting. As they left the arena, she caught snippets of conversation from the other recruits. The word Deathworlder was still being used, but the tone had changed. It sounded less like an insult and more like a recognition, perhaps even a warning. But Sarah knew this was just the beginning. She'd won a battle, not the war. And somewhere in the back of her mind, she wondered if perhaps that's exactly what the Academy had been counting on all along. The psychological warfare center of the Academy resembled a massive neural network, its corridors pulsing with bioluminescent patterns that seemed to respond to thought itself. Sarah stood with the remaining recruits, their numbers notably thinned after 2 weeks of increasingly demanding trials. Your minds are your greatest weapons, announced Instructor Nyx, a being composed of what appeared to be living shadow. Today, we test not your bodies, but your psychological resilience. Sarah noticed Vextral shift uncomfortably. Since their combat trial, the arachnoid warrior had maintained a cold but professional distance. More interesting was how the other recruits had begun to position themselves, no longer clustering by species, but by demonstrated capability. Each of you will enter a simulation chamber, Nyx continued, tendrils of darkness swirling. You will face your greatest fears, your deepest uncertainties. Many species cannot handle the strain. Some never recover. How reassuring, Zilpar whispered, its light flickering nervously beside Sarah. Over the past weeks, the Luminarian had become something of a confidant, their species differences creating an oddly complementary partnership. Sarah's chamber was last, a fact she doubted was coincidental. Through the observation window, she watched other recruits enter their tests. Some emerged quickly, their minds broken by whatever horrors they'd witnessed. Others lasted longer, but ultimately succumbed. Even Vextral, with his highly evolved mental defenses, staggered out after 20 minutes, his exoskeleton pale with stress. Interesting, Nyx materialized beside her. You show no apprehension. With all due respect, Instructor, Sarah replied, keeping her voice neutral, humans live with fear every day. It's our natural state. The shadow being's form rippled. Explain. Earth species evolved to be constantly afraid. Hypervigilant. It's not a weakness, it's how we survived. We learned to function despite fear, because of fear. It's our oldest friend. Without waiting for a response, Sarah entered her chamber. The door sealed with a soft hiss, and reality dissolved around her. She found herself back on Earth, in what appeared to be a standard military briefing room. But something was wrong. The shadows were too deep, the lights too sharp. Every instinct screamed danger. Psychological Assessment Phase 1, announced a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Beginning Fear Response Analysis. The room began to shift, presenting increasingly disturbing scenarios. Sarah watched Earth burn, saw humanity enslaved, experienced personal failures that cascaded into galactic catastrophes. But through it all, she maintained her composure, even as the simulations became more intense. Fascinating, the voice commented. Subject displays unusual fear response patterns. Initiating Phase 2. The scenarios changed. Now they were more subtle. Ethical dilemmas, impossible choices, situations where every option led to failure. This, Sarah realized, was the real test. Not fear itself, but fear of choice, of responsibility, of uncertainty. Hours passed. While other recruits had broken under the weight of their terrors, Sarah remained standing, her mind processing each new horror with what the observers might have mistaken for callousness. But it wasn't lack of feeling, it was something uniquely human, the ability to compartmentalize, to function despite emotional trauma. Enough, she finally said, her voice steady. I know what you're really testing. The simulation paused. Explain, Nyx's voice commanded. You're not testing our fear responses. You're testing our ability to recognize manipulation. To maintain rational thought under emotional stress. Sarah looked directly at where she sensed the observers would be. You're looking for species that can't be psychologically dominated. The chamber dissolved, revealing Nyx and several other instructors, including Administrator SS Locke. Their expressions, those that had expressions, showed varying degrees of surprise and approval. Correct, SS Locke's translator clicked. Though you've discovered this far sooner than anticipated. It wasn't hard to figure out, Sarah continued, pieces falling into place. The rushed combat trials, the focus on adaptation rather than raw ability, now this. You're not training soldiers, you're identifying species that can resist psychological warfare. Very perceptive, Recruit Chen, a new voice joined the conversation. A being stepped forward, one Sarah had never seen before but immediately recognized from classified Earth briefings, a precursor, one of the ancient species that had helped establish the Galactic Defense Academy. Humanity's admission to the Academy was not, as many believe, a political gesture, the precursor continued. It was a test. Your species' unusual psychological resilience, your ability to function under conditions that would break most sentient minds, these are traits we have been searching for. Because something's coming, Sarah concluded. Something that attacks the mind rather than the body. The room fell silent. Finally, SS Locke spoke. We have detected incursions. Entire species falling to an influence we cannot combat. Traditional defenses are useless against an enemy that turns your own mind against you. But humans, the precursor added, with your endless capacity for adaptation, your ability to face horror and continue functioning, your psychological flexibility, you may be one of our greatest hopes. Sarah absorbed this information, understanding now why Earth's admission to the Academy had been rushed, why the training had seemed specifically designed to test human capabilities. Does everyone know about this threat? Only the highest levels of Academy leadership, Nyx answered. And now you. Your performance today has earned you that knowledge and a choice. There is a special program, the precursor explained, for those who show particular resistance to psychological warfare. We call it the Mind Guard Initiative. It operates beyond standard Academy protocols. Sarah considered the implications. And if I accept? You will face challenges that would break most sentient beings. You will see things that defy comprehension. But you will be at the forefront of defending the galaxy against a threat most species cannot even perceive. Before Sarah could respond, alarms blared throughout the facility. SS Locke's scales shifted to alert patterns. It appears, the administrator hissed, that our time for preparation has run out. The incursions have begun. Sarah looked around at the assembled leaders, each powerful in their own right, yet all turning to her, to humanity, in this crisis. She thought of Earth, of all the horrors her species had faced and overcome, of the strength that came from millennia of fighting not just for survival, but for progress. Well, she said, squaring her shoulders, humans do have a saying, the best defense is a good offense. The precursor's expression shifted in what might have been approval. Indeed. Welcome to the real war, Recruit Chen. Let us hope humanity's renowned resilience proves as effective against cosmic horrors as it has against earthly ones. As new alarms joined the chorus and the Academy shifted to emergency protocols, Sarah couldn't help but think that perhaps being a Deathworlder wasn't a curse after all. Perhaps it was exactly what the galaxy needed. Emergency protocols transformed the Academy into a fortress. Crystalline barriers materialized across windows, psychic dampeners hummed to life, and quantum locks engaged on every secure door. But Sarah knew these defenses were largely symbolic against an enemy that attacked the mind itself. All recruits, report to Emergency Station Alpha, the announcement system blared in multiple languages. This is not a drill. Repeat, this is not a drill. Sarah sprinted through corridors now bathed in pulsing red emergency lights, her mind racing through possible scenarios. Around her, other recruits moved with varying degrees of panic, some utilizing natural flight responses, others freezing in confusion. Chen. Dextral's voice cut through the chaos. The arachnoid warrior was coordinating his squadron, but something was wrong. Two of his team members were walking erratically, their movements jerky and unnatural. They're compromised, Sarah called out, recognizing the signs from her briefing. The incursion's already inside. Dextral's mandibles clicked in frustration. Impossible. Our mental barriers are useless, she cut him off, grabbing his front leg to get his attention. This isn't the time for pride. We need to establish who's still themselves and who's been turned. Zilpar materialized beside them, its usual gentle glow now sharp and focused. I can help with that. Luminarians can detect subtle changes in consciousness patterns. Sarah nodded, already forming a plan. Do it. Anyone who shows signs of compromise needs to be contained, not killed. They're victims, not enemies. The next few minutes were chaos. Zilpar moved through the gathered recruits, its light probing for mental irregularities. Several more showed signs of infection, their minds already being rewritten by whatever force had breached the Academy's defenses. Emergency Station Alpha is compromised, announced a new voice, the precursor from earlier, now materialized in their midst. Fall back to secondary control. And Chen, it's time to implement the Mind Guard protocols. Sarah's hand moved to a small device now attached to her neural stem, standard issue for the secret program she'd just joined. Understood. Dextral, I need your help. Your natural mental architecture might buy us time. The arachnoid warrior studied her for a moment, all 8 eyes blinking in sequence. You knew this was coming. That's what the psychological testing was really about. Yes, she admitted. And now I need you to trust me, despite everything. Can you do that? A moment of tension passed between them, weeks of rivalry and species prejudice, balanced against immediate survival needs. Finally, Dextral's mandibles clicked in assent. What's the plan, Deathworlder? First, we need to reach secondary control. Then. She paused, knowing how her next words would sound. Then we need to let them in. What? The word came from multiple species simultaneously. Think about it, Sarah explained, moving quickly down a sealed corridor. Whatever this force is, it's beating us because we're trying to keep it out. But humans, we learned long ago that sometimes the best way to fight an enemy is to understand it. You want to deliberately expose yourself to a mind-altering cosmic horror? Zilpar's light flickered with concern. That's insane. Exactly, Sarah grinned. That's why it might work. Humans have something unique, not just psychological resilience, but adaptability. We don't just resist change, we absorb it, learn from it, turn it to our advantage. They reached secondary control, a reinforced chamber deep within the Academy. Inside, Academy leaders, including SS Locke and Nyx, were coordinating defense efforts, but Sarah could see the strain on their faces. Whatever was attacking them was getting stronger. The infection rate is accelerating, the precursor announced, materializing beside them. Standard containment procedures are failing. Sarah activated her Mind Guard device, feeling the subtle hum as it interfaced with her nervous system. Permission to attempt an alternative strategy, sir? The precursor studied her for a long moment. Your species continues to surprise us, Recruit Chen. What are you proposing? A controlled exposure. Use me as a test subject. If I'm right about human psychological adaptation, I might be able to establish a connection with the entity without losing myself to it. And if you're wrong? SS Locke, the scales had turned a pale shade of worry. Then you'll have one compromised human instead of an entire academy of compromised species. Sarah's voice was firm. It's a risk I'm willing to take. The chamber fell silent except for the constant wail of alarms. Finally, the precursor nodded. Proceed. But we'll need to establish safety protocols. What followed was a hastily assembled but carefully controlled experiment. Sarah was secured in a containment field, monitored by every sensor the Academy possessed. Dextral, despite his earlier misgivings, volunteered to act as a secondary mental anchor, his species' natural resistance to psychic influence making him the ideal backup. Ready? Zilpar asked, hovering nearby to monitor her consciousness patterns. Sarah took a deep breath. No. But that's never stopped humans before. She looked at the assembled group aliens who had gone from doubting her species to literally trusting them with their minds. Begin the procedure. The Mind Guard device activated fully, its neural interfaces extending into her consciousness. Through it, she could feel the edges of the invasion, a vast, alien presence that defied conventional understanding. Contact in 3, 2, 1. The world exploded into chaos. Sarah's mind was flooded with sensations and concepts that no human brain was meant to process. Colors that didn't exist, geometries that violated physics, thoughts that threatened to unravel the very fabric of consciousness. But where other species tried to resist, to maintain their existing mental structure, Sarah did something uniquely human. She leaned into the madness. Her mind, evolved to handle Earth's constant dangers and changes, began to adapt in real time. The entity, whatever it was, seemed confused by her response. It was used to minds that either broke or fought back. It didn't know how to handle one that welcomed it, studied it, sought to understand it. Through the haze of psychic chaos, Sarah heard Zilpar's excited voice. It's working. Her consciousness is evolving. She's not fighting the infection, she's incorporating it. Impossible, someone muttered. But Sarah knew better. Humans had spent millions of years doing the impossible, turning weaknesses into strengths, adapting to every challenge Earth had thrown at them. And now, as her mind expanded to encompass concepts that should have destroyed it, she realized why humanity had really been chosen for the Academy. Not because they were strongest or smartest or most advanced, but because they had never stopped evolving, never stopped learning, never stopped turning their fears into tools for survival. The entity recoiled, its attempt at dominance transformed into an unexpected symbiosis. Through their connection, Sarah began to understand its nature and, more importantly, how to fight it. I can see it, she gasped, her voice strained but triumphant. I know how to stop it. But I'm going to need help, from everyone. As consciousness returned to normal, Sarah looked at her alien colleagues with new eyes, and they looked back at her with newfound understanding. The word Deathworlder had gained yet another meaning, not just a survivor, not just a warrior, but an adapter, a bridge between what was and what could be. The real battle was just beginning, but for the first time since the incursions began, the Academy had hope. And it had come from the most unlikely source, a species that had turned their greatest weakness, their constant fear and adaptation to death, into their greatest strength. The Academy's secondary control had been transformed into a makeshift command center, its walls now covered in holographic displays showing the spread of the psychic infection throughout the facility. Sarah stood at the center, her Mind Guard device humming with newfound purpose, surrounded by representatives of a dozen different species. The entity doesn't just attack minds, she explained, her voice steady, despite the strain of her recent experience. It transforms them. But that's also its weakness. It expects resistance, feeds on it. What it can't handle is willing adaptation. You suggest we simply accept the invasion? SS Lock's scales rippled with skepticism. Not accept, incorporate, Sarah corrected. Humans have a saying, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. We need to apply that principle on a cosmic scale. Dextral moved forward, his massive form casting complex shadows in the emergency lighting. Explain how this would work, Chin. In practical terms. Sarah activated a holographic display, showing her own neural patterns during the contact. Look here, when I stopped fighting the entity and started learning from it, my brain created new pathways. It's not unlike how human ancestors incorporated beneficial viral DNA into our genome over millions of years. Fascinating, the precursor observed. Your species' evolutionary history has prepared you for this exact scenario, though you had no way of knowing it would be needed. That's humanity's secret weapon, Sarah smiled grimly. We never stopped evolving, never became perfect at anything. We remained adaptable because we had to. Zilpar's light pulsed with sudden understanding. And you believe we can use this approach to create a defense against the entity? Better than that, Sarah's eyes gleamed with intensity. I believe we can teach other species how to adapt. But it will require something unprecedented, a temporary merging of consciousness across species barriers. The room erupted in shocked exclamations. The idea of different species sharing consciousness was more than radical, it was revolutionary. Most advanced civilizations had developed in isolation, their minds as distinct as their physical forms. Impossible, someone muttered. The physiological differences alone would have made it impossible, Sarah acknowledged. Before my contact with the entity. But now. She gestured to her mind guard device. This has been modified by the experience. It can serve as a bridge, allowing different species to share, not just thoughts, but evolutionary adaptability. The precursor moved closer, studying the device. You propose to use humanity's adaptive capability as a template for other species. Remarkable. And incredibly dangerous. Everything worth doing is dangerous, Sarah countered. Humans learned that on Earth. Every major advancement, every revolutionary change, came with risks. But we took those risks because the alternatives were worse. Dextral's mandibles clicked thoughtfully. And you believe you can maintain consciousness coherence across multiple species simultaneously? Not alone, Sarah admitted. That's why I need all of you. Each species here has unique mental attributes that could be vital. Dextral's natural resistance, Zilpar's consciousness-reading abilities, the precursor's advanced mental architecture. She paused, looking at each being in turn. This isn't about humans saving everyone. It's about using our adaptability to help everyone save themselves. A moment of silence followed as the implications sank in. Then, slowly, Dextral stepped forward. I volunteer as the first test subject. If Chen is right, my species' natural defenses, combined with human adaptability, could create a powerful template. I too volunteer, Zilpar's light brightened with determination. My ability to read consciousness patterns could help stabilize the merger. One by one, representatives of different species stepped forward. Even SS Locke, despite his initial skepticism, offered his participation. The precursor observed it all with what might have been approval. You understand, the ancient being addressed Sarah, that attempting this could fundamentally change all participating species? Evolution on this scale, this quickly, has never been attempted. Sarah nodded. Change or die. That's been humanity's choice throughout our history. Now it's the galaxy's choice too. The next hours were a blur of preparation. The Mind Guard device was modified, enhanced with technology from multiple species. Sarah underwent intensive briefing on the neural patterns of each participating race. Emergency protocols were established in case something went wrong. Finally, everything was ready. The volunteers, 12 beings representing 12 different species, arranged themselves in a circle. Sarah stood in the center, the modified Mind Guard device now glowing with combined technologies. Last chance to back out, she offered, looking at each participant. Dextral's response spoke for them all. We faced our fears in the trials, Chen. We're not backing out now. Sarah took a deep breath and activated the device. Immediately, her consciousness expanded, touching the minds around her. It was overwhelming, dozens of different ways of thinking, perceiving, existing, all flooding into her awareness simultaneously. But this time, she was prepared. Instead of trying to control or direct the flood of consciousness, she let her mind do what humans did best, adapt. Her neural patterns began shifting, creating bridges between incompatible thought processes, finding common ground between alien perspectives. Through their connection, she felt the others learning, changing, growing. Dextral's structured thinking provided stability. Zilpar's consciousness-reading abilities helped smooth the transitions. Each species contributed something unique to the emerging gestalt. And through it all, humanity's gift for adaptation spread like a benevolent infection, teaching other minds how to change without breaking, how to grow without losing themselves. When the entity attacked again, it found not weakness, but strength. Not isolation, but unity. Not resistance, but evolution. The Academy's defenses didn't just hold, they transformed. The entity's attempts to dominate minds were met with unprecedented adaptability. Each attack turned into an opportunity for growth and understanding. Hours later, when the connection was finally severed, none of the participants were quite the same. They had changed, evolved, become something new while remaining true to their original natures. It worked, Sarah announced, swaying slightly from exhaustion but smiling. The infection is being pushed back. And more importantly, we've proven it's possible for different species to adapt together. The precursor's form shimmered with what might have been excitement. You've done more than that, Recruit Chen. You've demonstrated why humanity's admission to the Academy was so crucial. Not because you were perfect, but because you never stopped changing. As the emergency lights finally dimmed and regular operations began to resume, Sarah looked at her fellow volunteers, no longer divided by species prejudices but united by shared evolution. The word Deathworlder was still whispered in the corridors, but now it carried a new meaning, not a primitive survivor, but a teacher of survival itself. The galaxy was changing, and humanity, as always, was helping to lead the way into an uncertain but hopeful future. 3 months after the psychic invasion attempt, the Galactic Defense Academy's graduation ceremony looked very different from traditional years. The grand amphitheater, designed to accommodate beings of all shapes and sizes, was filled not just with graduating cadets but with representatives from dozens of worlds, all eager to witness the results of what many were calling the Deathworlder Revolution. Sarah Chen stood at attention in her formal Earth military uniform, now modified with the distinctive silver insignia of the Mind Guard Initiative. Beside her, Dextral's exoskeleton gleamed with newly added neural interfaces, while Zilpar's luminescent form pulsed with patterns that somehow seemed more structured than before. We gather today, Administrator SS Locke announced, his scales now bearing the subtle sheen of enhanced consciousness, to recognize not just the graduation of an exceptional class, but the beginning of a new era in galactic civilization. The precursor materialized on stage, its ancient form somehow both more and less solid than before. When we first approved humanity's admission to the Academy, many questioned our judgment. They saw only a young species from a high-gravity death world, barely out of their planetary civilization phase. Sarah caught glimpses of her fellow cadets in the audience, each changed in subtle but significant ways by their shared experience. Some showed physical modifications, others mental enhancements, but all carried themselves with new confidence and understanding. What they failed to understand, the precursor continued, was that humanity's greatest strength lay not in their physical capabilities or technological advancement, but in their fundamental nature as adapters, as beings who never stopped evolving. Holoprojectors activated, showing footage from the crisis, the initial panic, the unified response, and finally the unprecedented species-wide adaptation that had turned near defeat into revolutionary victory. The threat we faced, SS Locke took over, was one we had feared for generations. An entity that sought to dominate consciousness itself. Our most advanced defenses proved useless against it. Yet it was humanity's primitive survival instincts that showed us the way forward. Sarah stepped forward when called, accepting her graduation credentials along with a new designation, Interspecies Adaptation Specialist. The title still felt strange, but then again, everything about the past few months had defied conventional understanding. Chen, Dextral spoke up during the reception that followed, his voice carrying newfound respect. I owe you an apology. When you first arrived, I saw only a Deathworlder, someone whose species succeeded through brute force and lucky evolution. And now? Sarah asked, genuinely curious about how her former rival's perspective had changed. Now I understand that surviving on a death world wasn't your species' limitation. It was your greatest gift to the galaxy. You never had the luxury of perfection. You had to remain adaptable, had to keep learning, had to maintain the ability to change. Zilpar joined them, its light harmonizing with the neural patterns now visible on both their bodies. The old hierarchies of species development were based on the wrong metrics. We measured advancement by stability, by perfection of form and function. We should have been measuring it by adaptability. The precursor materialized beside them, drawing interested looks from passing dignitaries. Which is why we're implementing sweeping changes to the Academy structure. The Mind Guard initiative will become a core program, not a secret project. All species will be trained in adaptive consciousness techniques. There's still resistance to the idea, Sarah noted, having seen the political debates raging across galactic communication channels. Many species fear losing their unique identities through adaptation. A valid concern, the precursor acknowledged, but one that your demonstration has already answered. True adaptation doesn't erase identity, it enhances it. Each species that participated in the merger emerged stronger while maintaining their core nature. Like humanity itself, Vextral added thoughtfully. You didn't survive Earth by becoming something else. You survived by becoming better versions of yourselves. The ceremony continued into the evening, with representatives from various worlds approaching to discuss the implications of the new adaptive protocols. Sarah found herself acting as both diplomat and teacher, explaining concepts that humans had taken for granted but which proved revolutionary to more established species. The galaxy is entering a new phase, the precursor observed as the celebrations wound down. The rigid hierarchies of the past are giving way to a more dynamic, adaptive civilization. And it all started because we took a chance on a species that many considered too primitive for admission. Sarah looked out over the gathering at the mixed groups of species now sharing consciousness patterns, at the visible signs of willing evolution, at the bridges being built between formerly isolated minds. We never wanted to conquer the galaxy, she said softly. We just wanted to help it grow. And that, the precursor's form shifted in what she now recognized as profound satisfaction, is why you've succeeded where more advanced species failed. The future belongs not to the perfect, but to those willing to change. As the Academy's artificial night cycle began, Sarah stood with her fellow graduates no longer divided by species prejudice or evolutionary status, but united in their commitment to continuous growth and adaptation. The word Deathworlder was still used, but it had become a term of respect, even admiration. Humanity had given the galaxy something it desperately needed, not perfection, but the courage to keep evolving. And in doing so, they had found their true place among the stars, not as conquerors or subjects, but as teachers of the art of survival itself. The next class of recruits would arrive soon, including more humans eager to share their species' gift for adaptation. And this time, there would be no doubt about their worth. They were Deathworlders, yes, but that was no longer a limitation. It was a promise of things to come.